Hello.
Hi, Phin.
Hello,
Hi,
Phin,
Jeremy,
welcome.
Sarah. Thank you for having
Good
me.
to see you.
How's it going?
Good to see you. Come on in.
Thank you. Should we
This
start in the
way?
garden?
Yeah, why not?
It must be one of the most written about houses of the 21st century. Sometimes those conversations are about style, sometimes they're about gender, but in a way, the starting point, I've always thought of it as an environmental house. It's about how do you make ecological architecture in the 21st century. So maybe we could start there. Why, in the 90s, when you were designing it, were you thinking, we've got to build a climate resilient, low carbon, sustainable house? See, we didn't even use the term climate emergency back then. It was like global warming, and it just wasn't on the agenda in the way that it is today.
But we'd been away in America for 9 months on a Fulbright fellowship, and we were really struck by the waste and the profligacy of, use of fossil fuels. And it just, the penny dropped, and we came back really sort of committed to being green architects. So we spent a lot of time reading about what that might mean. It was pretty much in its infancy at the time. Brenda and Robert Vale had just built their house, and there was also obviously Walter Seagull. A whole number of things sort of coming into the conversation, and experimenting with our studios at the Bartlett and Kingston and thinking about what that could be, and it all just came together around this building.
But it was very early days, and we were designing it in 95, so 31 years ago. And so some bits which are now people just take for granted, like airtightness, was not even on the agenda. We're talking about breathing walls and whatever. And so the kind of the main moves are to do with the sun. So you get the heat of the sun and you allow that, and then you shade in the summer with the trees, and then massive insulation, which the bales do for us.
Yeah, okay, so assume we know nothing about ecological architecture. Why straw bales, which feels like not the kind of material that you'd maybe expect 90s buildings to be made from in central London?
No, I mean, it was a complete accident. So we were looking for something that was really good insulation on the north side where you're going to lose most heat.
Yeah.
And a friend of ours who was an eco-journalist actually made a kind of weird, just off-the-cuff comment about, oh, you guys are going so green, you'll be building in straw bales next. And we were like, what straw bales? So we thought, that's amazing, that could do it. So we researched it all, and then we found there's a whole tradition of it in America, and obviously other places where they grow a lot of corn. And we thought that's it, that's the solution. And so we just studied it. The structure is timber ladders, and then the bales are stacked between them, so they're just the infill, not the structure.
Okay.
And then they're sort of laced to it, to the structure, so they don't move. And that's it, really. And then they're plastered, or with the rain screen cladding like you see on the outside.
But they cost £1.50 each, so that the whole
bargain.
the whole
Cheaper
house
than a brick
was
these
less
days.
than £1,000.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing material, and also it builds very fast, because you can stack these things quite quickly. And so, you're saving time on your construction program and your scaffold and all the rest of it. So actually, it's a real no-brainer in terms of if you want to build, buildings quickly.
We built the whole back wall, which
In the
is
living room, isn't it?
25 metres long, in a weekend with 10 friends.
Wow. The bales aren't the only bit of environmental material innovation. Should we go and look at some of the other bits while we're outside?
Yeah. Gabions were invented for loading in shear, which is horizontal loading.
Yeah.
And so they're often used for motorway embankments and rivers. But we decided to do them as a load-bearing wall, which is a little bit unusual, and they wouldn't normally be used like this. But what we were after was a very fat architecture.
Yes.
To sort of greet you as you come in, and they're basically wire cages. You can see enormous chicken wire.
Yeah.
That come as a flat pack, and then you open them out like a cardboard box, and you fill them with something. In this case, it's recycled concrete, and then you close the lid and you put them one next to the other or one above another and build your structure with it.
So this is all like construction rubble from...
This is construction rubble
from this site or from some other project?
No, from a site in Stratford.
This wall is made of sandbags. Is it actual sand?
It's sand, lime and cement. And the idea is that because we're so close to the railway, we needed a very massive facade to withstand noise when we were in the office just behind there. And so we're thinking, well, what could we make on site in the spirit of the self-build, which would be fun. And we were very excited by a photograph of the Cardoma Coffee House during the war. During the Blitz, they had this amazingly expensive plate glass window on Oxford Street in the coffee house, and like many wartime buildings, they piled up sandbags on the outside with this little door that you could go into the coffee house. And we were so really taken with that as an idea. And so we thought, we'll make our facade out of sandbags. And the sleepers which frame the windows we found lying on the site. They were old sleepers from the railway line.
Wow.
And so, you know, it all looked like the last gunfight at the old corral. And we thought, yeah, looks great, you know.
Our builders call it Flintstone architecture, which I think is quite nice, actually.
It does have a sort of like rough and readiness that feels very appropriate given we're next to this extremely loud railway line.
Yes.
But there's also the idea, I mean, most buildings are designed to be timeless, and therefore they're kind of perfected, shiny surfaces.
Yes.
And we wanted a facade which kind of was full of time and gradually would decay.
Yeah, I thought we could start by talking about what a solar thermal strategy is, because a lot of people might not know that you don't actually need to have loads of radiators if you design your architecture well enough. And I feel like a lot of the main moves around the design of this house come from thinking about energy, thinking about how to maximize the heat that we get from the sun, even in a kind of cloudy country like the UK, to minimize your heating bills and make the building more sustainable at the same time.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about solar thermal?
The idea is to optimize the conditions that are around you. And obviously the sun is a great source of heat. So in an ideal world, you'd face your main living rooms to the south, and you'd try and capture breezes, but you would also need to shade the south from very strong high-level summer sun by introducing shading devices on the outside of the building to stop the sun's rays, which are the heat rays, hitting the house and overheating it in the summer months. So what you're also trying to do is in the winter, capture the low-level sun to come in, because that's when you need most heat. Ventilation is also really important. So these windows completely slide away so it can get ventilated in the summer. And we've also got the tower, and the tower has a louver on the far side, and there are louvers next to the front door at the ground level, which is shaded. So it means that cool air can enter at low level, and then through thermodynamics and the action of breezes as it passes across the tower, it'll draw the air up through the building and cool the building, which is a principle they've used in Iran, for example, in their wind towers for centuries. And actually that works really well here. It's also the principle we use in the larder as well.
This is the sort of curved bit
That's
behind
the curved
us.
bit, yeah.
So how does that work?
That has a hole in the base which allows air coming in, and then there are vents at the top to vent it out as it rises, because as air rises, it gathers heat, and as we know, heat rises, and then so it's expelled at the top, and
So
that
it's
just
like,
keeps it permanently cool by moving
Right.
the air through the larder, with thermal mass on the inside as well.
So it's like
to
a
retain
natural
the heat.
fridge almost, like you can
Yes,
store
exactly.
vegetables in there.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're going up the tower. So air is getting drawn up right from the bottom, all through the
Correct.
house.
All the way through.
that open door.
And this
to here.
is how you control it, by opening this shutter here, and behind it is a louver with insect mesh. And it doesn't look very much, but you can feel a breeze coming in already.
Yeah.
And in the summer, when the lower one is open and that door below is open as well, this draws the air up through thermodynamics. And when prevailing wind here is from the southwest, so as it passes across here, it's coming from the other side. This creates an ever so slight vacuum
Yes.
as it's sort of sucking around it, and this will pull the air out at the same time. So through thermodynamics and this slight negative pressure on the other side, it draws the air through, and it's extraordinary. You're looking skeptical, but it really works. You stand on the lower level and you can feel the breeze pass you. It's really amazing.
So you don't need like an electric fan or anything
No,
like that?
it's a natural fan. That's the whole point. All of this passive stuff that we've been talking about, it's all about how the building works without needing electricity or
And
any
why
power.
don't we have systems like that in, new builds everywhere?
I don't know. Well, probably because of what I said already, that we've lost touch with these basic things about building physics.
Yeah.
People don't know about them anymore.
Yeah.
So one foundational text for me was Bachelar's Poetics of Space, and obviously the idea of a place of dreams being up in the sky was
Yeah.
quite important. And for a creative, I think that's quite a kind of poetic metaphor, isn't it? And we always have this joke that Jeremy is a caveman, whereas I'm the person that likes to be in the sky. So whenever there's a bunk bed, I'm always on the upper level. And I think, that tension between kind of the chthonic, the ground, and then, the place of dreams is really nice. And so the tower has a little room up there where you can just get away from the whole thing and just be on your own, which I think is really nice. It's an amazing thing to have. Jeremy's written his books there.
Something that I find very compelling about this house is the sort of mix of new, interesting experimental moves, like making a wall out of straw and then covering it in the corrugated cladding, and then some like really old principles like the stack effect that's similar to these Iranian wind catchers. What do you think the kind of future of environmental architecture is? Is it that hybrid of like the old and the new? Like how do you what would you advise other designers to be thinking about as we try to address climate change through architecture in the wider economy?
I think you're right that it is a mix of the two. I mean, you shouldn't deny technical solutions. Solar panels, batteries, air source heat pumps are all kind of necessary and obvious things to do. But I think one has to also just look back to the vernacular and just see what it meant to build with thick walls, what it meant to have natural ventilation in Iran, what it meant to, we'd just come back from Tunisia, amazing storehouses in 40-degree heat, which keeps the wheat cool in the summer because of the mass of stone. So there are lots and lots of different things you can learn from the past, and I think it is that hybrid thing.
I think that architects are quite beguiled by our whole cultural conversation around progress and technology. So the idea of, you know, novel technologies solving our problems. It's a very modernist idea as well, that you can build what you like because the technology will sort out the problems for you, as it were. So we've lost our contact with an understanding of building physics and how basic things about your environment can actually assist to a very large extent how your buildings perform. And it seems to me like we need to get back in touch with that. That's what vernacular architecture did. It understood how those things were. And in a way, it's embedded knowledge which we're in danger of losing. That's not to say that, you know, we shouldn't take regard of, you know, energy generation and so forth. But I think we need to cut the amount of energy that we're using at the same time, because it has massive implications for global heating. And an understanding about these basics of building physics, which don't change, is really important to help us to reduce that.
One of the probably the most effective thing here is nothing to do with the building. It's those trees. So in the summer they shade it because there's leaf cover. In the winter those drop so the sun can come through.
Because they're deciduous trees.
They're deciduous trees. I mean, it's kind of really, really simple.
And this is the kitchen.
This is the kitchen. So this bit is bringing the whole thing down to the scale of the body to make it a bit more intimate.
Okay.
Especially when you're seated.
Yeah, it feels so kind of cozy being under the slightly lower roof. And then the ceiling of this bit is painted white, is that right? To sort of...
Because clerestory bounces the light back so that you can stand at the kitchen without needing the lights on. Great.
There's this really nice quote that I found from an essay you wrote called "The Future is Hairy." And I'm just going to read the quote out. You say, "Most walls are detailed to shrug off the effects of time, but this is a wall that has been designed to allow time to pass through it and thereby to modify it, an evolutionary architecture." And you were talking about the sandbag wall and the way that, you know, eventually the bags would disintegrate and fall off and the wall would kind of change its character through exposure to natural elements. But I think that idea kind of permeates a lot of the building, actually. You know, this is not a building that attempts to put up a tough, rigid, macho resistance to the elements, but kind of works with sun and rain and passage of time, which feels very different to a lot of contemporary architecture, which is often designed to be as hard and tough and unmoving and unflinching as possible. What do you mean by hairy architecture? This is a phrase that you've used a number of times, but what does that do for you?
Well, I think one interpretation, which is slightly different from what you've talked about, is that it's tactile and sensory. And I think this building is all those things. Then I think its weathering potential is quite interesting. I mean, obviously, I've mentioned several times the idea of the perfect product through the interiors that are photographed in very particular ways, but also that, you know, modernism sort of assumes that the building is its perfect product and it will always be like that. And somehow we've ignored the need for maintenance, you know, that you need a lot of work to keep something in its pristine state. And again, a bit like cleaning and cooking, you know, one doesn't want to be doing that all the time. So let's think about what a building could be which could accept the passage of time gracefully and weather well and, you know, not need this constant maintenance. So as it grows old gracefully. That is one interpretation of it.
But it's also the idea of architects want to always be in control, which is why the history of architecture, particularly modern architecture, is a history of instance of a building which has just been finished before these really annoying people move in, called users, and upset and lose, and the architect then loses control. And one of the great myths of architecture is that it's timeless. And if you look at the way architecture is written about, it's a thing of great approval to say this is timeless architecture. So, you know, someone like Peter Zumthor, you'll see in every single review of a Peter Zumthor building the word timeless within it. Whereas it's impossible to deny time. And I think that by letting it through in various ways, through material ways, through the stories, through the idea of mucking up perfection, through the gender analysis and narrative, lots of time is allowed through. And that gives the building, I think, a kind of different sensibility to the perfection of the modernist myth.
I think also it means an acceptance of change as well. So as we're growing older, you know, we're thinking about how can this building accommodate us if we're incapacitated in any way, or, you know, can't see so well, or can't hear so well, or can't move as agilely as we used to in the past. And so, you know, that ability to adapt and accept that change takes place, I think, and embrace it actually and make a virtue out of it, I think is really important.
So during the retrofit in 2018, we did a lot of thinking about, we've been in the building for 25 years, we want to be here for another 25 years, how do we adapt the house for that? So one thing that we did is we took the existing kitchen and we moved it downstairs, and there's a bathroom and there's a thing, so that could be where our carer could live, and we would just exist on this level. We've got in a place where we could put a lift in if necessary, and we could just float around in this on this level. And so it's just really simple things. But and Sarah did a lot of work on that as a project she did when she was at the University of Sheffield. And one of the clear arguments that came out is future-proof while you still can.
I feel like some of the moves in the house have to be read as rebelling from the prevailing wisdom at the time. And there's some interview I saw with you, Sarah, where you're talking about how it was very popular in the 90s to have glass balustrades, and these sort of like beautiful, almost structural glass banisters and things. And you were like, that's an insane thing to do, because then you've got to clean all this glass, and who's going to do that? And sure enough, there are internal balustrades, but they're just made of bungees here, which I imagine is rather easier to clean than if they were all made of glass. Now, of course, glass balustrades aren't so in vogue. What was the kind of culture like that you were rebelling against, and how do you feel like this house is a reaction to that culture? Kind of 1995 British architecture spirit?
Well, for me, I think part of the reaction was seeing the classic photographs of people's beautiful, expensive houses in magazines, which obviously are very staged, but the idea of a sort of perfect interior is represented by something like the Farnsworth house, for example. But how, in a way, controlling and dictatorial that kind of architecture is. There's a sense of you need to live like this rather than living your life and then the building adapting around you to the way you live. And I mean, the issue of the glass balustrades, I always think, is who's cleaning that? You know, who's hoovering, who's clearing up the toys, or, you know, wiping the kitchen surfaces. And for me, that's to do with, you know, women's role within the house and the idea of who does the caring or the cleaning or the, you know, mopping up or whatever. And And I think that's, that's a big issue for me as a household. I don't want to be doing that all the time. So in a way, we wanted to make an environment that's very relaxed and able to accept those everyday events, and still look good. And obviously for me, as a woman, the idea of home as a workplace is very real, and historically, it's been always tagged as a place of leisure, but that's because that's for men. And, when they came home from work, they would expect their dinner or, their slippers by the fire or whatever. But for women, it's a place of work. There's cooking, cleaning, shopping, looking after people, blah, blah, blah. And so in a way that became a really interesting counterpoint about working both at home and at work, in the office, and also where, there's downtime. I wouldn't call it leisure so much, but, where is it that your mind switches off and you can be creative, or you're mulling over a problem or something like that. And I found as a designer that actually those downtime moments are really creative. And sometimes they're while you're washing up. Sometimes you're in the garden, sometimes when you're at the cooler or making a cup of coffee. It can happen in lots of different places.
So this room is, in a way, the crystallization of that manifesto about, is it a workspace, is it a domestic space, is it both simultaneously?
When this sliding door goes back, it reunites this space with the rest of the house for when it becomes the dining room.
Okay.
Or the party room, or whatever you want it to be.
But then it's also a boardroom, or it can be.
Yeah, it can be. And when I ran the office here, this sliding door was closed, so you don't see the interior of the dwelling. And people arrive up half a flight of steps from the entrance, and they would come here first. So people arriving from outside come to the most public room in the house.
But you often said that kind of men from the business, when they were sitting in here, felt uncomfortable because it didn't look like a patriarchal corporate boardroom, that it had these elements of kind of weird art or
there's sort of our art, and it's obviously a dining table, not a conference room table. So there's a bit of it's a bit of a sort of moment where people are assessing, where am I, what am I doing here, what is this place, which I always used to think was quite hilarious, really.
I think it's great. Shall we wander down and underneath the office and out?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you for having me. It's been really nice to see you both again. See you soon. Bye, Jeremy.
Bye-bye.